Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 85 of the In a Nutshell podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and I'm joined alongside Joe Meade. And tonight we're going to do a little bit of a Big Ten basketball recap from the past week or so. And Joe, since we last did this, there's a new sheriff in town. Your Michigan Wolverines are now top of the pile at 11-2 in the Big Ten, just ahead of Purdue at 11-3, and Michigan State at 10-3. Joe, we expected Michigan to kind of fall off from this three-team race and for it to become a two-team race between Purdue and Michigan State. And that's exactly what's not happened. Michigan goes into Assembly Hall. They get a huge win where it looked like they were going to win it by a lot. Then it looked like they weren't going to win it at all. And then they get across the line there. And then just last night, they take Purdue down at the Chrysler Center. Joe, I think Michigan fans would have probably been okay with just one of those two, but you get both of them, and you're the top of the league. So take me through the last week for your Wolverines.
Yeah, Sean, I think immediately just talking about last night or 2 nights ago when most of you are going to listen to this on Spotify or YouTube. I really believe that Michigan grew up ever since that last Purdue game. And you look at the scores and you don't really see that. You look at Penn State winning by a few, you don't understand. You see them barely beating Rutgers without Harper. You see them barely beating Oregon when they were dominating the whole game. And then it all came to a head Saturday against Indiana. There were stretches of this game where Purdue would go on 7-0 runs in less than 2 minutes, where you thought it was more of the same from the first game. The difference is this time Michigan was ready for the moment. Dusty May in his post-game presser admitted that, in the offseason, a lot of these guys were new. Aside from a Ronnie Gale, Will Cheddar, or Namari Burnett, most of these guys weren't accustomed to the Big Ten and the physicality. And I think they kind of showed that on full display when they went to Mackey Arena a few Fridays ago. To fast forward to that performance last night, each time they were close to teetering, falling behind by as many as 11 points, they'd hit a big shot. Whether it was a Namari Burnett or Ronnie Gale, who in this new role off the bench, I think opens up his game a lot more. He's not really picking his spots, competing with shots with Vlad Golden or a Trey Donaldson, and Reuben Jones being the comic presence with his great defense and I wouldn't call it great shooting, but he's got a nose for the ball. You could tell he's a very high IQ basketball player. I don't even mean coach speak. You could see it in his game, especially with that last putback dunk. And take nothing away from Purdue either. This is a heck of a team. I think they are Final Four good. I mean, Braden Smith, even though there were 26 minutes where he was scoreless, he still had over 20 points and shot. He's clearly the Big Ten player of the year. I don't see anyone really catching up to him at this point. And for Michigan to kind of freak out a victory at the end when they missed free throws, I thought the recipe was going to be less than 12 turnovers and 9 threes. They had 11 turnovers, two of Purdue's 11 turnovers, and they outscored Purdue's bench 21-0. And I think they won the margins in this game. Though they didn't win the free throws, they won the margins when it counted. And that's why they're 11-2 in first place. And, you know, I think that's why they've kind of skirted by in a lot of these games.
They're really well, I wouldn't say positioned, but they're really set up to win close games. They've got an incredible isolation player that nobody really knows how to guard, and they make free throws. Now, the turnovers part of it doesn't really fall into that, but I think Michigan has gotten themselves across the line a lot of times when they didn't deserve to this year. And if you're Michigan, all you have to do is get in the game late, and you would feel pretty confident about where you are in terms of winning the game. Last year, the complete opposite for you, and I think you've gotten across the line a couple times when it didn't think you were going to, and it looked like Indiana was going to win that game. It looked like Purdue was ahead for most of that game, and Michigan just drags themselves across the line here, Joe. That's what Big Ten champions do. Now, it's still a long way to go, but with the schedules of the other two teams, I think Michigan, you have to say, has the best chance of the three to actually win the regular season title at this point.
Yeah, I think we'll save those questions for the end, Sean, because I do think there's a decent amount of debate you could have. Maybe there's some metric you could look at. I really couldn't tell you, but aside from the eye test, which of course we're going to judge on this podcast, bringing it back to the Indiana game, Sean, it is a disturbing trend Michigan's had of late. Purdue was the first game they trailed for 90% of the game, about 35, 36 minutes, and Indiana was quite the opposite. They led. Indiana never had the lead. The closest it ever was tied a few times in the first half and toward the end there with 4 minutes left. I think you're seeing the coaching chops of Dusty May on full display, whether it was switching to zone against Indiana, kind of slowing them down, whether it's, I think ever since Danny Wolf was centered in on, and I talked about this a lot in our previous episodes, where you force him to just pass to a Vlad Golden. Um, I think he was really, I mean, force him to pass to anyone other than Vlad Golden. He makes a lot of mistakes. I think Dusty's kind of coached him through that. And I think most impressive of the three, I just named is going to be this one, which is he found a way to not necessarily limit Braden Smith, but to not let him destroy you the entire game. He destroyed Michigan in runs this time, not consistently throughout the game. And I think other teams should pick up on it. I think Michigan had a lot of success kind of doubling Smith and then closing out on other guys. Trey Kaufman-Red being in foul trouble also helped a lot. I don't think he had his best game, and I think Wolf's length bothered him a lot. And Jeff Goodman talked about it on his podcast last night. He thinks other teams are going to adapt to that. Matt Painter, who does have a tough game on Saturday against Wisconsin, as we mentioned. I would be shocked if Greg Gard didn't try some semblance of what Dusty May did. But Sean, getting back to the other team in the state of Indiana or the other team in the state of Michigan, it's kind of funny. They kind of traded off. Michigan played Purdue, and then the other Indiana team went into Michigan. And I think, frankly, if you went into the night saying that Indiana would be the victor of those two games, I think people would have called you insane. But Sean, take it away from here.
Yeah, so Indiana had, I think, been playing pretty solid basketball, even though they haven't been winning the last couple weeks. They deserve to win. They should have beat Maryland. They should have beat Purdue, and they should have beat Michigan. And they finally got across the hump here last night with a win over Michigan State at the Breslin Center. Now, a couple years ago, or 5 years ago at this point, this team was in the midst of a long losing streak. They won at the Breslin Center, and they had a 13-game stretch with 12 losses, and the one win was at the Breslin Center. So hopefully it's not a fluke like it was then. But, Joe, I think we saw Indiana figure some things out, how to compete with some of these better teams. And their last 4 games have been against the teams in first, second, third, and fourth. 3 of them they had great chances to win, and the other one they just lost by 12. So I think the Michigan State win, we're starting to see the results match the level of performance from the Hoosiers. They weren't able to get the job done against Michigan, but they go on the road. They fall behind early. They switch to a 2-3 zone. It gives Michigan State all kinds of trouble, and Indiana's able to win without really shooting all that great. So I think defensively against Michigan, they only gave up 70. Against Michigan State, they kept them under 70. So, and they're playing a little slower. I think we are starting to see Indiana figure themselves out a little bit. They've been playing better. They finally get over the hump. The next 3 games are at home. One against UCLA, a team that hasn't won outside the Pacific time zone. Purdue, a team that you just had on the ropes at their place. And then Penn State, a team that's last in the standings. So, Joe, I think there's no doubt Indiana's playing better basketball right now. But the question is there enough time to turn this thing around?
I think we'll get into this later, but I think to answer your short question, I think there's enough opportunity if you look at this remaining schedule. I think Purdue's probably got to be your other signature win. Certainly, Michigan State was one. I know on the road at Ohio State's a really impressive win, but I think they're in need of.
It is, but they're a
I
bubble
think they're in
team.
need of. I think they're definitely in need of one more of these, Sean. And you look at this schedule. There's ample opportunity for that. Whether that's home against Purdue, whether that's away at Oregon, or even a home game against UCLA, who again, the metrics love them. They're a top 25 team in a lot of net rankings. I think, frankly, that's a game on Friday. That's almost a must win, to be completely honest with you.
Yep, I think they. I'm not sure this zone will work against every team like it did against Michigan State, but I think it might work against UCLA too. Bilodeau is the only one over 40%. I think as long as you don't let him step into threes, I think we're going to see a lot more of this sort of amoeba. It's very much like Merrimack. If you've watched mid-major basketball over the years, the guards kind of follow everybody at the top, and it's able to hide some of the defenders. I think we will see it against the Bruins, and then after that, it becomes a different story. But Joe, Michigan State's lost 3 out of 4 here. I think we have been saying for a while that they were going to lose some games. But it seems as if there might be a strategy that is pretty repeatable that at least get you in the game with the Spartans. We saw Oregon go zone for a little bit, and it was working, and then Michigan State blew them out in the second half. But I have a feeling that Michigan State's going to see a lot more zone the rest of the way because Indiana didn't do anything crazy. I thought they covered the middle pretty solid. They gave up some mid ranges, but if you can't step into threes like Michigan State can't, I think there is a formula there that other teams are going to try to exploit.
Yeah, Sean, and a big part of that, I want to single two guys out, not necessarily calling them out, but two guys that can easily buck this trend for Michigan State. One's Jeremy Fears. I know he didn't play against Oregon. Probably, I think he was dealing with like a sickness there. Against Indiana, I don't know what he was still dealing with, so I don't want to be unfair to the guy, but he has to learn to step up, take his shots, and I think another unlucky factor in that game was Carson Cooper and their bigs. Not only did they not have their best games, they got in foul trouble and they clearly played timid against Malik Renew and Umar Ballo in the limited time he was in there in the second half. So I'll be real honest, Michigan State, they're very lucky they're not on a 4-game losing streak. I know Oregon shot the lights out in the first half, and that's not necessarily fair to say that that's going to be sustainable for a lot of teams. What I'll tell you is this, though, Sean. I think Michigan State with this upcoming stretch, it's not a stretch where you really want to find yourself. You just want to find your old self. Finding yourself is a little late for that in the middle of February, to be completely honest with you. I think they kind of are what they are. They're a team that's still a great free throw shooting team. We saw that on a full display last night. Probably would have even had a shot to come close there had they missed any of their free throws. The other thing I like about them still is I think Jaden Akins can be a game breaker. We have not seen that of late, unfortunately. We saw it in stretches in the LA road trip. Don't think he needed it as much against Oregon because Jason Richardson really saved the day in front of that 2000 national title team. And I think he's going to have to step up, quite frankly, Sean. At Illinois versus Purdue, at Michigan, and at Maryland. To be completely honest with you, Sean, the way the standings are right now, if you see them on your screen, or just to give you context, they're 1 game back of Michigan. They do see them twice, but all of those 4 games I listed off there, Sean, I think 3 of those 4 they're going to be underdogs in just because they're on the road. And the 1 game that might be slight favorites in is probably this team that's still the best team on paper in the Big Ten, which is the Purdue Boilermakers. So Michigan State, I think they need to fix that in a hurry. I think they have to, they're a terrible 3-point shooting team. They're either going to have to find ways around it or find ways to improve it. And I think it's going to have to be the finding ways around it. And I don't doubt Izzo could do it. What I doubt is that the competition they're playing is the teams to do it against. Illinois, who we'll talk about in a second, is finding themselves. Purdue's pissed off and, also facing a similar stretch. So I think they know the importance of their next 4 games.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what kind of response they give because in the last 8 halves of basketball that they've played, they've been the worst team in 7 of them. And the second half against Oregon was good enough to make up for that first half, but again, in what Indiana has done to them is kind of the reason why Indiana's had success against Michigan State over the years. They don't really double the post. They'll dig a little bit, but they won't make you spray it and zip it around. And then that's why Renew and Ballo went off. They're way better than Michigan State's forwards. You gave them one-on-one opportunities. Ballo's in some foul trouble, still at 14 and 10. Renew 19 and 12. It seemed like a good matchup for the Hoosiers, and they really exploited it. But you look at the teams on the top of the standings: Michigan, Golden, and Wolf. If you give them one-on-one post-ups, they'll score. Trey Kaufman-Renn, you give him one-on-one post-ups, he'll score. So I know Michigan State has them up in the next couple, like you said.
On Tuesday.
And then Illinois don't really play through the post as much, but still they could. They at least put a lot of pressure on the rim. So, again, I think some of these other teams at the top, and Indiana, who's not at the top, are kind of well equipped here to attack Michigan State's weakness, and it is what it is. It's not changing at this point. It's been this for years. They've had subpar forward play, and it's going to be toughness. They got to make the free throws. They can't turn it over. They got to find somebody who can make a shot, and then they got to go from there. But it is a little bit alarming. We thought a fall off of some kind was coming, but to be thoroughly outplayed by two teams that are not in the field right now with USC and Indiana, I think is a little bit alarming. And the people that were pointing to the schedule as the reason for their 9-0 start might have a little more fuel in the fire right now.
Yeah, Sean, and you know, I think Michigan State, they're going to find out what they're made of. I'm not saying that should they. I'll be honest, Sean. If they lose four in a row, I still don't think they're a bad team here. Well, it'll be five in a row. If they lose all the four games I listed, it's very explainable. I just don't think, based on where they started, that going from a team that probably had. I mean, we talked about it that Michigan State almost had this, not necessarily in the bag, but they were, the kings of this race for a while. To go from that to kind of knock down a peg to knock down all the way, potentially fighting for a double bye. I'm not going to get that far, but it's very possible that should this linger, it could be a big problem. I think it's safe to say, Sean, Illinois, who we're probably going to talk about right now,
Yep.
this game on Saturday, I don't know if it's the biggest game in the conference. Maybe Purdue, Wisconsin is just, and we'll talk about Wisconsin also in a second. Maybe that is for standings, but I think in terms of two teams that have real potential to go far in March, one team's going to find to be asserted that they're clicking, and the other team's going to still be asking a lot of questions.
And as the people look at the standings, there's a real, distinct top seven that's separating themselves. And that's kind of the place that you want to be going into the Big Ten tournament, Joe. We've talked about that dreaded 8-9 game. They're 2.5 games ahead of that right now, Illinois. So you have to think that they're one game essentially behind fourth, and fifth and sixth. I don't think are all that bad either. 7, you'd have to play 10 the second day. Not the worst thing, but Illinois is playing a little bit better. They have 2 wins in a row at Minnesota, which they won pretty well. We know who's had trouble there. Minnesota's been playing a little better. They didn't have issues there, and then they take it to UCLA, and a 3-point barrage nearly gets the Bruins back into the game, but Illinois gets across the line. So, Joe, Illinois is not a good 3-point shooting team either. It seems like they've figured that out, and they're really attacking the rim. They're getting to the free throw line. They're keeping their 3-point numbers around 20 rather than the 30 or 35 that we've seen at times. But, they've looked pretty good these last 2 games. Are you starting to see Illinois creep back into that top 25 team that we saw earlier in the year?
I think so, Sean. And I know, beating UCLA at home, I don't want to overreact to it, but the way they thoroughly dismantled Minnesota, and ever since they really should have lost 2 games in a row to Ohio State and Rutgers, I think Brad Underwood's made some clear adjustments. He's kind of shortened the lineup. You're not seeing Gibbs Lawhorn in there as much, and you're not really seeing Trey White in there as much. I think there's a reason for that. I think it's probably hard on those guys, but I think it's been successful thus far. And the threes they're taking, they're trusting guys, whether it's Jakashos, Ivisic, Huma Kraus. I think those are the guys they wanted. Huma Kraus kind of went into a little drought there on the road, but I think he's kind of finding his stride again. I kind of compare him to Max Klesman of Wisconsin. If he gets going, that unlocks a new level to that team, and I think it's kind of go time for him in this last stretch for the Illini. I really think that game on Saturday is going to be so fascinating because I can see it going multiple different ways, and there's so many storylines. Whether it's Illinois gonna get back into this up-down trend, or can they finally get it going like we've seen in flashes at the beginning of the year? I think Will Riley, Yakashonis, and Ivisic playing well of late is a really good indicator to them. But you know, how many times have we been down this path with Illinois, Sean?
Yeah, and the question is can they do it again? I think they've played pretty solid 2 times in a row. They've got 3 great opponents in the next 3. Michigan State at home. We heard all the noise from the last game. The Spartans won in a close one at the Breslin Center, if you don't remember. But Illinois had a bunch of foul trouble on some questionable calls. Their fans were crying foul about the refs. Well, they got a chance to prove that they're the better team here. They're playing better. They're at home. If they are who their fans say they are, they win against Michigan State. Then you go on the road to the Kohl Center, and then you get Duke at Madison Square Garden, a interesting non-conference game there. So this is probably the best time of the conference season to be playing well, and they've shortened that rotation, like you said. They're not a good 3-point shooting team, but they have 3 3-point shots that are highly efficient for them. It's Yakashonis off the dribble, Will Riley off the catch, and Humrekhaus off the catch. They're like around 40 to 50 there. Everything else is not a very good three-pointer. So I think they're starting to figure that out a little bit. And, the way that they spread that offense, you can still get to the rim. You can still run pick and pops with Ivisic. Merez Johnson's getting more minutes. I think Brad Underwood is starting to figure out how this team has to win. Now, they're playing a bunch of good teams here, so they still could lose, but I still think they're headed in the right direction, discovering how they have to play to win at a little bit more of a consistent rate. Because jacking up threes is so much of a variable, and they could win by 30 or they could lose by a lot at home to a team that they're better than. So I think so far so good for Illinois. Can this strategy work against a little better competition is what we're going to find out here soon.
Yeah, Sean. Did you have anything else on Illinois, or you think you want to move on to the other team who I'm, getting more and more impressed by as these days go on?
So there are two more teams I wanted to talk about before we got into the bubble talk, and I think one of the two is yours. Joe, there are two teams on the right side of the bubble right now. First, the Nebraska Cornhuskers, 6-7 overall and 16-8 in the league. Joe, they've won 4 in a row, dating back to last month. A win, they beat Illinois in overtime. They went on the road to their Pacific Northwest trip and beat Oregon and Washington, and then they beat Ohio State on Sunday. Joe, we've seen a good Nebraska early on, a pretty bad Nebraska there in January. Then they end the month with the win. They rattle off a couple road wins. They beat Ohio State at home. Where are you at with this Nebraska team? And they are trending up for sure. They host Maryland. Again, another great opportunity for a victory. But Fred Hoiberg seems to have these guys trending up.
I'm severely impressed by them, Sean, and I think what Fred Hoiberg's done a good job of, and maybe he doesn't even get that much credit for it, is Bryce Williams and Jawan Gary, 4 games in a row, have both played very well and complemented each other. And to be honest with you, Sean, in that little 4 game stretch, I don't think they're a better team on paper than Ohio State. Certainly not better than Illinois or maybe Oregon. So I'll give them one of those two benefits of doubts. But either way, Sean, this is a team that's playing really dangerous right now, and this is a team that can still go on a run. Maryland. Line's not out for that game quite yet. I wouldn't be shocked at all if they're favored. I know.
Yeah, they should be at home.
Yeah, I know FPI. ESPN certainly doesn't have them as favored, but I don't really look at that metric. At Northwestern, who Sean and I talked off air, Jalen Leach along with Brooks Barnheiser both out for the year now. It's going to be really hard for the Wildcats in that game. At a Penn State team who's in last place, and then hosting Michigan. Now, aside from the Michigan game, maybe they're not favored in that. I wouldn't even be shocked for their favorite at that point. This is a team that could potentially go on a 6-7 game win streak. Now, I don't want to get ahead of myself talking about this because Maryland's proven that they can play well enough on the road to win and eke games out. But this is a team, Sean, that we'll talk about this for your bracketology today. They played themselves off the bubble and into the field almost like in the course of a week. Is that safe to say?
Yeah, I think the Illinois game, we talked about that as kind of a inflection point for both teams. Both of them weren't playing well at that point. Who was going to turn around their season? Somebody had to win. It was Nebraska. And then the Oregon game got them back in position. A road win like that against a team just definitively into the field. They avoid the letdown at Washington, and then they beat a team that at the time in Ohio State was pretty close to them ranking-wise. And head-to-head is the best way to pick another team over another. They do play again. And, Joe, just a quick look at Bart Torvik here. The Ohio State game is the only one where they're underdogs the rest of the way. They're a half-point underdog against Maryland at home, essentially a pick-em against Northwestern, a pick-em against Michigan at home, -1 at Penn State. And then they have Minnesota and Iowa. They have a couple of 4 games left against non-tournament teams. You have 2 tournament teams at home. The only away game against the tournament team that you have left is a team that you already beat once. So I think the schedule is it is lining up nicely here for Nebraska to make the tournament. They have probably the best duo in the league, I would say, in Bryce Williams and Juwan Gary, maybe second or third best behind, obviously, Braden and TKR. But this team is finally seeing what they're made of, and I'm not going to pick against them in any game the rest of the way, because Bryce Williams is probably I'd say other than Danny Wolf, the toughest matchup to guard defensively, and it's easy to say now after we've seen it, but it's not. It shouldn't be that surprising that they're finding success.
Not at all. And Sean, one thing we've done well on this podcast that I know someone's going to DM me if I say not at all again, they'll smack me, so I get it. But Fred Hoiberg could coach. We've been apologists on this show for a fair amount of coaches, some more controversial than others. I was a Chris Holtman apologist for a while, and probably has not aged so well. But one thing I'll say about Fred Hoiberg is the guy can coach. The guy's been on the hot seat multiple times. It was rumored he'd be on the hot seat again, but there were that little stretch there. He should not be on the hot seat again at Nebraska unless they revert back to the pre-Tim Miles days. So I think if I'm a Nebraska fan, I'm feeling pretty comfortable right now. And although we said each game is either a toss-up or your favorite in, I don't even think it takes going an insane record in your
No.
last 7 or 8 games. I think it might even take 4-3 without a bad loss, and it's more than okay.
Yeah, no, they're in a good position right now. And before we get into bracketology, Joe, the last team I want to talk about is Ohio State. They lost to Nebraska on Sunday, as we mentioned earlier, but they did beat Maryland during the week, and they're beating Washington right now by 12
They're probably
at
going to win
at
that.
home.
Let's face it. Yeah.
They should win that. And I mentioned this a long time ago here, and I said Ohio State was a team to watch as probably squarely on the bubble. They don't have a great win-loss record, but they have a bunch of good wins. They grade out well on the computers. It just seems like Ohio State cannot find a landing strip of games where they can win a bunch of in a row. They're kind of seesawing back and forth. Good win, tough loss, bad loss, good win. They are on the and what Ohio State has right now is certainly good enough to be in the field. Probably stay out of Dayton, but what you've seen from Ohio State, I don't think we can expect anything else other than they're probably going to be right where they are now at the end of the year.
Yeah, Sean, even, this little landing spot they have now, home against Washington, let's assume they win that because we're recording during that game. Michigan at home, I think they could win. I'm not even trying to be a pessimistic Michigan fan. The way Ohio State scored and the way Michigan's consistently turned it over, aside from last night against Purdue, that's how Ohio State capitalizes in games. That's how they win second half. So you have to give it to Jake Diebler. Whatever he does at halftime is working. Maryland outscoring them by 10 plus in the second half. The only game where that really didn't happen was Illinois of late, Sean, and that was at Illinois against a team who we know is one of the most on and off teams in the country. So I look at this stretch of games for Ohio State, and I think if you win home against Michigan, a quad one win, Northwestern you really should beat at home. Uh, you might be going to the LA road trip you have here, um, maybe only needing to split, and even if you drop two, I think the last 2 games of the year provide ample opportunity to have good enough wins. I think, totaling that, let's assume they pick off Michigan, Northwestern, Washington, Nebraska, and one of the Nebraska Indiana games. But I just listed off there 4 wins, 18 and 13 going into the Big Ten tournament. We've seen worse teams with worse records get into the tournament with that. So I do think what they have is they don't have any horrible losses, and that's what's really going for them. Barring loss to Northwestern, which even then wouldn't be too harsh a loss. I think Ohio State gets in unless they lose all of the games that they're like slight underdogs in, which would be Michigan, LA games, at Indiana and Nebraska, which I don't think they'll be an underdog in either. So
Yeah, they've got 3 really interesting games the rest of the way for me. USC on the road. USC not quite a bubble team at this point. They're probably a little bit off of it. Wouldn't be a bad loss. Wouldn't be an amazing win. It would be a solid win. That one's interesting to me. And then they play 2 of the Nebraska at home, a team that's slightly above them, but certainly not safe yet. And then they play Indiana on the road. And that game essentially could be a play-in game by that point. Indiana's already beaten Ohio State on the road, so it wouldn't really help the Hoosiers all that much to beat them again at home. It would really help the Buckeyes, though, to beat them on the road. So they've got 3 really, really interesting games the rest of the way. Obviously at UCLA, home to Michigan. Those wouldn't be bad losses, would be great wins. But they have a couple of these mid games, like teams on the road that they're slightly better than but could lose, and then a home team against a team that's slightly better than them. Those 3 games, to me, are going to dictate whether this team is a 1 seed in the crown in Dayton or whether they're an 8 seed wearing their home uniforms. I mean, all 3 of those possibilities are pretty likely at this point. And I think they'll probably win some of their games the rest of the way. They'll probably lose, maybe, especially they'll probably lose one that they shouldn't. And then I think we're going to see them in the 9 to 10 range right now. And unless you got anything else to add, Joe, I'll throw up the bracketology.
Yeah, I guess as you're getting that up, Sean, one team I want to point out, they didn't play much since our last recording, is Wisconsin. And we're going to get into questions too. And I'm shocked this wasn't asked, to be honest. If you look at the standings, that were just stuff you want to rewind or just re-remember.
I'll put the standings back up.
Yeah, Wisconsin is 2 games back at 9-4 of Michigan at 11-2. But if you look at Wisconsin's schedule the rest of the way, at Purdue, home against Illinois, home against Oregon, Washington, at MSU, at Minnesota, Penn State. Now, what sticks out are the at MSU and at Purdue, pardon me. But maybe if they pick off one of those games, Wisconsin, I know they're 2 games back, and that kind of seems like a sizable gap at this stage, Sean. I really think they could be a dark horse in this title race. One we didn't see coming, especially when they're kind of left dead to rights starting 0-2 in this conference play.
Yeah, they've got, again, two. We're going to find out whether they have the chops for it at Mackey and home to Illinois. If they can win both those, then they'll be right in it. They could lose both of them, and then they'll be hunting, trying to get that 4 seed for a double bye. And then, they have Michigan State on the road, too. So they play the other teams up there except for Michigan. So, they could. You want to play. If you want to come back in a title race, you got to beat the teams above you. You can't really trust other people to do it. But yeah, I think they're just out of position right now, Joe, potentially a 2-0 week, and they might be the top of the league next time we record. We didn't expect Michigan to be there, and there they are. So Wisconsin probably just out of it right now, but pretty close to turning it around if they do win. All right, Joe. Yeah. Bracketology this morning, 2-12, does not include any of the action today. We saw a little bit of movement in the Big Ten. Purdue and Wisconsin on the 3 line, the Michigan schools on the 4 line, Illinois to a 5, Maryland, UCLA on the 6 line. Then we had Oregon on the 8, Nebraska on the 9, Ohio State on the 10, and then Indiana as the 4th team out. So a little bit of shuffling here and there. We had a couple of big games against the teams at the top playing each other. Purdue dropping down off the 2 line, Michigan up to the 4. What do you want to talk about here as we get into bracketology?
Sean, I think we should just start off with questions, and then I could kind of give my commentary if that's okay with you. Yeah. This one, I think, from a Michigan fan that just probably does not like Michigan State or is hate watching for whatever reason, but in which case we'll still ask the question. From Chase, sorry, no, my bad. From Hunter, our resident Michigan fan. Thank you for tuning in and asking, Hunter. Should Michigan State drop 3 of their next 4 games? How much would they slide down, considering all 3 of those losses would be quad 1 losses? And they're at a 4 right now, for all the viewers who are not.
Quad 1A also. Mm-hmm. I mean, it would have to depend on the margin, to be honest. They are 2-2 in quad 1A right now. That would make that 3-6. Again, probably not much. Maybe to the 5, but Michigan State's is still in a good spot there. They did take a little bit of a hit in the metrics with that home loss to Indiana where they were favored by double digits. As long as they stay in the top 25 in the metrics, I think they still should be a protected seed, and they still have good wins. You can't take those away, so again, I think a 1-3 would probably be okay, in all honesty, over the next 4.
Yeah. Not fielding questions from the Kentucky fan who commented. Sorry about that. Not an SEC cast. Save that for Mike and Sean's cast. From Chris, our resident Illini fan. He asks, you have Illinois as a 5 seed, which I find pretty interesting. What I don't understand is, can they advance past or down from this? I think definitely down from this, Sean, but answer the other part of it. Can they perhaps get up to a 3 or 4, maybe?
Of course. I mean, they play Duke, who's the number 2 overall seed right now. You can win that. Wouldn't help your Big Ten play all that much, but that's maybe a seed line game for Illinois. I mean, the second best team on a neutral, it's hard to get a better game than that. You still have quad 1A games other than the Duke game against Michigan, Purdue, and Wisconsin. Michigan State is a quad 1B game right now because they're 21st, but if they go to 20, that's a quad 1A. Um, you really have one game left that's not really good, and that's the home game against Iowa. So, yeah, I mean, definitely. I think a 3 seed is probably still in the cards if they're able to win a couple of those big games and avoid the avoid losing the Iowa game. But yeah, certainly, I think Illinois is probably one of the most volatile teams we have left because their win-loss record's not great. It's 17-8. If they end up at like 19-11 or something, then maybe they're down at the 7 line. But yeah, they could move a ton in the next couple games.
Yeah. Crowbar Fred Brax, our Ohio State, I think an Ohio State fan, yeah, for Ohio. He asked Sean, if Ohio State finishes with +3 over losses, let's just assume a 17, 14, 18, and 15 record, does that get them in if they don't suffer a bad loss the rest of the way, which I don't think is possible?
I would have to say yeah.
Yeah.
Again, it's hard to see hypotheticals. We have over in the Big 12, Kansas State, who is now 13-11 and playing themselves back into consideration, and they're the other team to watch in terms of wins and losses, just straight up wins and losses. But yeah, I think 3 games over at Ohio State should be okay. They have the good wins to back it up. You would assume a couple of those future wins would be good also. Yeah, I think so. I think Ohio State would be okay with +3.
Yeah. Only a few more, Sean. We will try to get to everyone's. If not, we'll definitely try to hit you back in the messages because I think a lot of these are genuinely good and curious questions. Perfect. From Chuck, an Indiana fan. Sean, what is your prediction for Indiana's status in the tournament? Will they make it? Will they not? Or will they be playing in the Crown Invitational?
We talked about this just before we clicked record, Joe. This seems an awful lot like 2019 for Indiana, where they were good early in the year, then they hit a really big rut, and then they put together a pretty impressive stretch run, and they ended up coming just one game short. That would be my prediction right now, that they probably go to the Big Ten tournament, then they don't win the game that they need to. But in terms of the Hoosiers, the bubble is really bad, and the Hoosiers are 3-10 in quad 1. These other teams on the bubble have just horrendous quad 1 records with losses in quads 2 and 3. The analytics are essentially the same. Maybe next time, Joe, we can do a little bit of a blind resume, and I can put them up there for you, and you can see, how close we're dealing with here. But, we've got. So I'll give you this off the top of your head here. I'll give you 3 teams that you might be able to figure out, maybe not. All right, 3 teams. Which one's the highest? Team 1, 50 average in the metrics, 14-11 overall, 1-10 in quad 1 with 1 loss in quad 3. We have 56 average metrics, 14-10, 1-8, 1 loss in quad 2, 1 loss in quad 3. And then we have Team 3, 15-10 overall, average metric of 56, 3-10 in quad 1, and no losses outside the first quadrant. I mean, there is nothing separating those 3 teams, and one of those is on the screen in bracketology, and the other 2 are not.
So Indiana's the 3rd team. What are the other 2?
So the other 2 is Pittsburgh and North Carolina, who are 5th and 6th teams out right now in the field. So if you're putting Indiana at the 4th out right now, they play 3 home games in a row. Like, you win the next 2, and I think you can start to hope about making the tournament. VCU and SMU are a little interesting. VCU is an average metric rank of 36, 18-5 overall. They're just 0-1 in quad 1 games and 3 quad 2 losses, and then 1 outside of quad 2. So again, Indiana doesn't have any quad 2 losses, and then SMU out of the ACC, 39 metrically, 19-5 overall, 0-4 in quad 1, and their other losses in quad 2. So the metrics, 20 points better in the metrics, is taking them over Indiana right now, but eventually good games do matter. And if Indiana gets to 5 or 6 quad one wins, that might be enough in this
Yeah.
year's tournament.
All right, two more shot. We're gonna go Brian and Adam. Brian, Purdue fan, I believe. Yes, Purdue fan. Just looking at his Instagram. Yeah. Brian asks, Sean, why did Purdue drop from a 2 to a 3 seed? And does this ultimately matter? Is it more so Purdue dropping the game at Michigan or other teams winning?
Yeah, I think it's Texas A&M. I've got to look back. Um, yeah, Texas A&M has had a great week. They beat Missouri on the road. Missouri's a 6 seed, and then they beat Georgia, who's a 10 seed, and then Purdue. They took a little bit of a hit metrically, and Texas A&M is like just a better team right now, in my opinion. And they also did play, and the Aggies did win way back in December. So, yeah, we've got Purdue at 9 in the metrics, and Texas A&M at 13, and 7-5 in quad one for Texas A&M, 7-6 in quad one for Purdue. So we're looking at essentially the same team with a head-to-head on a neutral. I mean, there's not a better way to pick. It's very close, and the fact that Texas A&M won that game is probably the difference, honestly.
Yeah. Finally, from our friend Adam, who is a Wisconsin fan, but asks a wide-ranging question, not only to do with bracketology and the Big Ten standings. Sean, Joe, between Michigan, Michigan State, Purdue, and a potential dark horse in parentheses Wisconsin, I think UCLA. He asked this probably before. No, he asked it after. I don't think UCLA is really in the title race, to be completely honest with you, unless they win out.
They got to win a game in the Eastern Time
Yeah,
Zone before we get there.
I think of those four, Sean, who would you pick? And I could go first if you want me to.
Yeah, go ahead. We talked about this a little before, but I think we might have different answers.
I still think it's Purdue, to be completely real with you, Sean. I think they're the most complete team. I think they have a for sure thing with both Braden Smith and Trey Kaufman-Renn, and then you have the X factor of can Fletcher Lawyer pop off. I'd assume CJ Cox off the bench, and a lot of these other guys are going to have more than 0 points combined. I think that's a real safe assumption, to be completely honest with you. And I look at this schedule. I'm just going to project real quick. Home against Wisconsin, away State, away Indiana, home UCLA, home Rutgers, away Illinois. Um, you would
Yeah.
think they go 4-3 in that, but I think they go 5-2. I think they pull one off they shouldn't to get to like 15-5. I think perhaps they could split a title with a Michigan who goes 15-5. I do think the path, especially with the way they're playing right now, is toughest for MSU. We talked about their first 4 games. Their last 3 are no easier. Home against Wisconsin, away against Iowa, who's not that bad of a team, as I tell everyone, and home against Michigan. So for that to be your reprieve of the 7 games is pretty tough. But with that said, Sean, I'm gonna say Purdue with the exception that I think they could split with Michigan just because Michigan, only needs to go 4-3 to go 15-5.
I think looking at the schedules, Joe, it's very hard to say that one has a distinct advantage over the other. And I think we're going to see a two-way tie at 15-5 also. Maybe even a three-way tie. I do think it's Purdue. Michigan probably has the best chance right now to win at least a share. Like you said, they're in a position where if they play solidly 4-3, they're probably in, or not in, but tied for the title. I think it's probably, I probably agree. Michigan and Purdue tie right now. That's my prediction. But Michigan State, they play each other, so the Spartans could still win the league. I think Wisconsin could still win. But that's a good idea for a post, comparing the schedules, comparing the records, and asking people to pick who they think is going to win.
Yeah, Sean. One last segment we'll do. Not going to be very long. Of the matchups this weekend, what is one potential upset you see? I could go first. I said it earlier. I think Ohio State gets Michigan. I think Ohio State's been playing. I don't even want to say like they've been up and down, but at home they've rarely missed. I know the Indiana game and the Michigan State game stand out, but in the second halves of these games, they just find ways to score. Whether it's a Micah Parrish, obviously a Bruce Thornton, they get Devin Royal back. Uh, you got to figure Ohio State's due to, pop off against a really, really good team. They did so against Purdue. I think they could do it again against Michigan. So that would be my upset pick of the weekend. Sean, what game is got your particular attention between Saturday and Sunday?
I don't know if it's really an upset because I think a lot of these games are going to be very close, or at least they're supposed to be. Um, I think the Michigan State Illinois game is very interesting because I think some people may have been a little quick to anoint Illinois the winners in this game. Michigan State still beat them once, and I think at this point it would be a pretty big upset if the Spartans win with how the two teams are playing. So I would just, I'm not calling a Spartans victory here, but I think that is my game to watch um, because that might shape a little bit of the title race here because Illinois not in it right now probably won't be there. They have 6 losses, but Michigan State can win that. I don't think people are really expecting them to. So I just wouldn't count Tom Izzo out. They got outplayed by a team that they shouldn't have at home. I mean, how many times have we seen Izzo teams bounce back from that and win a game that we didn't think they would? So that's my game to look out for.
Yeah, Sean, and I do think that game decides whether Michigan State's going to stay in this title hunt, to be completely honest, because I could see that uh, them winning there, inspiring them into like a win against Purdue, and then set up for uh, almost a winner take all for the moment against Michigan next Friday, or it could snowball into an absolute must win against Purdue, probably not only for the title race but also for their psyche. But um, Sean, if we have, I have nothing else to add on this. Do you have anything else, or you want to close this out?
Yep, I think we're going to wrap it up. We've got a number of videos coming out over the weekend. Keep checking out Bracketology, TikTok, all of our game posts, and hopefully that Big Ten title post that we will thank the commenter for giving us the idea of. So thank you everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.